Hello, my name's Naranjan, the host of Master of Your Crafts podcast, learning from leaders who are continuously inspired, passionate, and driven to align with their soul purpose, sharing their gifts to bring healing to others. The music is composed by Rebecca Everett. And I spoke with David Lawson, the founder of Awake Warrior, where they transform burnout and anxiety through holistic coaching rooted in ancient healing practices. After his own personal journey from tragedy to peace, he now guides men to reclaim clarity, resilience, and a joy for life. Enjoy this conversation, and thank you for watching. Hello and welcome to David. How are you, David?
I'm excellent, Naranjan. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm excited to get into this conversation, not only from your own experiences of what you've gone through, but the support that you offer other individuals, men and women, on their own healing journey. The question is, with the journey that you've been on, in your healing journey, what does that define who David is sitting in front of me today? Does that define who you are?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you had to ask me that 3, 5, 7, 10 years ago, I would say that would define who I am. But now, as I've evolved and done a lot of the inner work, I think trauma doesn't define who we are. It happens to us, but it doesn't define who we are. So I try to step back and not make what happened to me in terms of a traumatic event when I was a kid part of my story, although it does come up in podcasts and such. But
Sure.
thinking back, I used to always ask why. Why did this happen? Why?
Sure.
And I don't need to know the answer why. It was part of my soul's evolution, my journey, and my father, who passed away fairly, when I was at a young age, part of his evolution. So those two things sort of shifted for me in the last few years. The the main thing, your first question about, does it define me? No, it doesn't define who I am as a person sitting here right now today. It happened, but it doesn't define who David is. And also, just to add a little bit, I don't need to know why it happened. Like for years, it was always like, why? You always wanted to figure out why these things happen in life. And really, there's no real why, like other than that's part of our path and our soul's journey.
But surely that was a journey for you to get there, to surrender to the why, because I feel it's almost an innate behavior as human beings for us to wonder why. Why do we have to go to school? Why do we need to have a good education? Why do we need to eat our vegetables? Why do we need to live and do these things in our lives? Because we want to see a result at the end of it. So wasn't it a natural element of curiosity of why that situation happened to you?
Yeah, I think for sure. Like you've hit the nail on the head. Like as human beings, we have this innate nature to want to know.
Mm,
We also not only why, but we want to know what's going to happen next. Like what's going to happen tomorrow. We have this
sure.
real problem of living in the moment and not really knowing what or why is going to happen next. So,
Yeah.
part of the inner work and the freedom that I've found is letting go of that need to know why, because it's really not all that important. And if you're constantly out wondering why, I think it kind of puts you back in that constant story and almost like a victim. Like it defines who you are. Like, why did this happen? Why? So you're caught in that sort of inner dialogue that can loop and loop and loop for years for
Right.
many people, and they stay in that victim mentality. Like, why me? It's almost like, why did this happen to
Sure.
me? It's almost like it's you're stuck in that looping pattern. I think once you learn to let that why go, you become a little bit more empowered, and you can become more of the person that can step forward into your personal power versus living stuck in that sort of victim mentality mode.
I agree with what you're saying. In addition to that, it can also give us reason and perhaps an element of acceptance as to what's actually happened, of okay, this is what needed to unfold. So for instance, with your journey and your experiences, that's put you in a space to support other men and women through their own journey and integrate some of their wounds and acceptance of who they truly are.
Yeah, that's a good addition, Naranj. I mean,
Yeah.
realistically, if this didn't happen to me, I probably wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today. So some of these things that are wounds and they sound awful, they can become we can turn them around and again become empowered, and they can turn into gifts to help
Absolutely.
others who perhaps are just starting where, I was 10, 15, 20 years ago, say.
Absolutely. There's always somebody ahead of us and there's always somebody behind us, right? And that's our
Yeah.
journey and that's our opportunity. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think a lot of what I teach, the reason people and what you do as well is there's an element of um, modeling. So I call it modeling. I think it's a term that Tony
Mhm.
Robbins uses, and it's when you can learn from someone else's experience, you can save yourself in many cases years because they've done a lot of this stuff already, and they can implement that into your life. What all the research and say all the courses and all the training and the inner sort of stuff you've done. You can sort of it's not that you do the work for them, but you can guide them to the resources a lot faster than say they would on their own.
Sure. Absolutely. How did you define that this was an element of your calling in supporting others? Because we
Yeah.
can all go through experiences in life and not define it as a calling, but rather have it as that's an experience that I had, and I'm glad I'm through it and got to the other end of it. So let me continue this way in my life and do X, Y, Z, rather than this is what I'm supposed to do because I went through it. What was that shift or that tipping point for you
Um,
where that aha
so
actually
all
happened?
yeah, when it happened to me, I was 15 years old. I had a traumatic event. So my whole life, it was always about wanting to learn about others. So I read thousands of books, like autobiographies and self-help books, and I started taking courses on like restorative yoga and meditation, and I started studying qigong deeply and Ayurveda and all these things I was studying at the time. I didn't realize I would use them today to help others. It was really for my own knowledge and my own sort of healing journey, um,
Yeah,
learning ways that I could survive and cope in a much better place of again from that victim to the empowered individual. And then
hmm,
now when I'm teaching or coaching all these modalities that I studied, I've got teacher trainings, I've got all sorts of different things. I've been to India a couple times and studied deep with some amazing, amazing Vedic masters and sages that taught me how to breathe and how to
yeah,
really sit with the constant sort of mind shadow that we all have, which is not easy. A lot of people can't do that. You hear people say, "Oh, I can't meditate." Like it's not. These skills are they take practice, and so I've been on this sort of daily practice of working with some of these things,
yeah,
and then over the last few years, it seems that a lot of people have turned to me when something's come up because they've seen my own. So for example, a friend would say, "Hey, I'm going through a really rough time in my relationship." So they would, I would spend some time with them, and this is how it all sort of evolved. It was actually about 3 years ago, and one of my friends said, "You should really be teaching this and coaching this," and then that sort of planted the seed. And the more I sat and got quiet with myself, I mean, I'm an entrepreneur. I own a couple businesses, but it was not really serving my
yeah,
heart, I guess. And I started to feel this pull from, you want to call it God or the universe, to really start to serve others. And that's how it kind of started. It was just this really strong pull to start sharing with others what I've studied over the past, 15, 20 years.
yeah. And that's quite a journey and shift, and very courageous to be able to do that because it's not an easy journey, an extension of yourself to support others who are in that such tender, vulnerable state.
Yeah, there's that, and there's also, as you know, in our day and age, you have to sort of put yourself out there and do marketing. So you're almost making yourself very vulnerable to the world because you're saying, "Hey, this is who I am," and you don't know if people are going to accept that or judge you or love you or hate you. So that's part of something I'm still learning to work through is just putting yourself out there and making yourself vulnerable to others to others.
Yeah, it is definitely a journey. It is definitely a journey, that's for sure. For sure. What do you feel are some of the key attributes that connect you to your purpose? be it supporting others on their journey or your own commitment to yourself?
I think both the both of those would ring true because when you're helping others, I mean, there's an old saying, we teach others what we need to learn for ourselves.
True.
So, the more that I'm teaching this stuff, the more I'm evolving along
Yeah.
the finding that more of that inner peace and that calm and that space where I can support even more people, and create different things and different offerings and different services as I'm doing this. It just helps me learn and grow even further. And then also it's also helping others. So it's very fulfilling to watch someone that's going through a really rough time and watch them sort of come through that.
Mm.
And then as they come through that, it gives me, I guess, the ability to say, and the confidence to say, hey, this is something very special that I should be really putting out there.
Exactly. Are there certain systems or structures or routines that you have put in place for yourself that have become a staple in your life to keep you centered and focused?
Yeah, like, I mean, I was just writing about this today. It's it's amazing how many people start their day with these phones. Like they wake up and
Mm.
they turn on their phone, and it's probably one of the worst things you can do in terms of creating, serotonin or cortisol, sorry, it's stress in the body, because right away you're thinking, oh man, I got a text message to respond to, I got an email to respond to, and then you start comparing, say, yourself on social media. So I've one of the things I first do when I wake up is I have a room that I'm in right now where I come in and I sit, I do breath work, and I meditate and I pray and I journal, or sometimes I may, I really check in. One of the things that that's very powerful for men and women for that matter, that we're not really taught as kids, is to really check in and ask yourself how you're feeling, like almost like a
Right.
daily practice. So after I meditate, after I do some breath work and prayers and journal, I'll just ask myself, how am I feeling? And then when you
Mm.
do that, it's a really powerful way, even though it sounds really simple, but it's a really powerful way to move some of these emotions that in most cases we're taught to suppress them. And
Right.
as you know, there's a huge amount of people that use addictions to suppress
True.
that stuff. So it's one of the first things I teach my clients is a daily practice, even if they don't have the time to meditate or to do breath work, just to take 5 or 10 minutes and do a really simple process of asking themselves how they're feeling. And then they may
Mm.
express that. Some people like to write it out. Some people like to maybe scream or punch a pillow. If it's anger, they may
Mm.
punch a pillow or scream, or some people may cry. It depends what they're feeling. But the main thing is to check in and see what it is, and then try and actually express that emotion in a number of different ways that people can do that.
Mhm. That's a good inward reflection and a good centering point for anybody who's looking to do it. And whether you do it in the morning or whether you do it after a busy meeting or after the kids are in bed and all those pieces in between where there's been a stressful or taxing time that's happened, I think that's a really good anchor, if you will, to even do maybe a couple of times a day.
Yeah, no, for sure. And again, I have a pretty structured morning, so there's that, and there's sitting, and then I like to move, like I like to exercise. So it could be a number of different things: cycling,
Mhm.
biking, yoga, meditate, or sorry, qigong. I do something that's similar to Tai Chi,
Yeah,
swimming, just about an hour to an hour and a half of something that really gets me in my body. Because again, a lot of the times our culture, we're taught to sort of work from our necks
that's
up.
right.
So we're taught to solve problems, and we're taught to be intellectual and create and in our work environments, it's a lot of it is up here, and we're not really connected to the body.
Yeah.
So I think movement is, again, it sounds like a simple thing to do, but it's probably one of the most important things I think people can do is, and especially if you can do it in nature. I think if you can connect with nature,
Mm.
it can be even double beneficial. I'm not a big gym fan. I'm not the people that go to gyms. There's nothing wrong with that, but I think when you spend time in nature, it's a nice fresh air is very good for you. And it's also nice to connect and watch what nature does, because nature doesn't push. Nature doesn't try and solve problems. Nature
No.
just sort of is bees and exists. And when we can tap into that, the more you spend time in nature, I think the more you start to realize that we're exactly the same, but we're just conditioned to always be, again, solving problems and goal setting. And
Right.
we're human beings, but we don't spend too much time being. We're always sort of doing. So I think when
That's
you
right.
connect outside with nature and you're moving, it can be a huge benefit. And I think if there's a huge problem, as you know, with young kids now with ADD, and I think if they spent more time outside, I think that would probably start to decrease in huge numbers.
Yeah. I think whether you have labeled yourself or identified yourself as ADHD or not, limiting screen time is pretty important. So while I believe these devices are really important and they connect us to lots of people and lots of things and information, I think the overload of them can be detrimental in who we are and our true essence to connect and have that inward aspect of yourself, which is what I'm hearing what happened to you and was a natural stage for you to go inwards.
Yeah, most definitely. And you look at the average business person nowadays, because that's a lot of my clientele. Like it's CEOs and managers and executives, and they have this. There's this almost FOMO. It's like fear of missing out if they're away from that phone for more than like some of them don't even go away from for more than a day. Like they're on, it's on
Mhm.
the weekend. Um, I try and instigate a rule in my own life, and I try and tell my clients the same as maybe every quarter, like every business quarter, try and take a week away from like a solid week with no phone, no email, nothing. And that sounds impossible, but if you set yourself up and if in your business to do that and you delegate in a manner that's productive, it's surprising how much time away people can actually take. But I think there's this badge of honor that executives wear that if I'm working 60 hours a week and I'm
Yeah.
and I'm always with my phone. I mean, even when I go on vacation now, it seems that the business people still have their phones. It's like they're working on
Right.
vacation. I think we've lost with the technology as amazing as it is, we've lost some of um, the old fashioned vacation time where you don't have a phone and you're not constantly texting or emailing or even
Yeah.
taking phone calls. So I think
Yeah.
um, as I said, in my own life, I try to every quarter shut that out for a week, and then I advise my clients too. And some of them might not do the whole thing, but they'll start to think twice next time they go on vacation to say, "Hey, you know what? Maybe I can switch my phone off for a week or two."
Right. Right. Yeah, that speaks volumes on so many other levels in terms of not wanting, feeling the fear of losing something in the corporate sector, but also fear of potentially what's going to be revealed to themselves if they create some space. Because ultimately, that's it. When we disconnect from our phones, go on vacation, we create some space, and sometimes that space can have a deeper awareness as to maybe some of the core issues or the challenges that are showing up in life that are outside of the workplace. So
Yes,
be
no,
it,
it's a funny story. One of my neighbors is a CEO, and he's been a CEO for like 30 some odd years. And he used to say, in the 80s and the 90s, when some of these executives would go on vacation, with back then without cell phones and iPhones and such, they would be really challenged because they went from being at the office all day and all night for the most part and entertaining at night to nothing. Say they're in an environment where they're out of their office, and a lot of them had a really hard time with that. Like you said, when you create space, you have to deal with what's there because we all are basically energy. So if you've created the space and you can allow some of the energy to move, which is actually a good thing. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It's actually very healthy and beneficial. But some people in our culture have a really hard time with that space, like you mentioned, and connecting with some of the stuff that in many cases we've pushed down with working too much is one way, or alcohol
right.
or drugs or whatever it may be. When you have to connect with that space, we were never taught how to do that as in
Yeah.
school. We're
Yeah.
conditioned in school to stay busy too for the most part. So yeah, it's a really important point that you bring up, Naranj, is that when we are in that environment of doing nothing, as much as it's challenging, it's probably one of the best things we can do for ourselves in our lives.
That's right. Which often comes to the case of when there are challenges in our lives, we often say, just sleep on it.
We say
And
what,
this,
sorry?
just sleep on it. And the
Yeah.
results and the outcome will come the following day. So if you sleep the night with a challenge or an obstacle that you're faced with, the results will present itself the following day in the morning. So it's leaning into practices like that. And if anything, for those who are so extremely busy, my first inclination would be how efficient can you operate that you're not being robbed of all of your time. So efficiencies, I think, is an important piece, but I digress.
Yeah, and one of my cousins gave me really good advice. He's also a CEO, and he said, David, if you want to stay healthy and be successful in your business, you need to do three things. And he said, delegate, delegate, delegate. So
Hmm.
that's something we all sort of get caught up on as entrepreneurs. It's very easy to do sort of say admin tasks, or we're working really in the business. So we're getting all our time is being taken care of some of the smaller details, which in many cases you can outsource nowadays. You don't even necessarily have to hire someone. There's like virtual
Yeah,
assistants, and I mean there's bookkeepers and accounting people that can help you with some
yeah.
of the admin stuff. So it's the trap that I see a lot of entrepreneurs get caught up in is they end up spending all their time taking care of some of the smaller details when a lot of them could be delegated to somebody else, and then they can free up their time to take more vacations without their phones and have even more time during the day to spend outside in nature. So that's something we all do as entrepreneurs. I think we get caught up in working in the business. We should be really sort of working on the business, the things that are more productive and that we enjoy, and the things that aren't as productive and we don't enjoy. It's easier to delegate to others.
Hmm. How did that work for you in finding the resources and finding the tools to recover from your experience? You had an experience at the age of 15, I believe.
Yes,
Was that right? And
yes.
so what was your outcome from that? What was your ahas, your lessons, your learning, and how did you manage that experience? Because any experience that we have that takes us out of our physical awareness and into a different state of consciousness at any age is possibly quite challenging. But at the ripe age of 15, I think that would be really quite um, challenging for you to integrate back into life.
Yeah, so all the things I'm talking about that people are doing, I actually did.
Hmm.
So, I suppressed my emotions with in my in my teens. I was lucky I was plugged into playing hockey. So hockey kept me sort of, my mom and dad used to say kept us out of the beer parlor, so to speak, or off the streets because you're playing hockey 3 or 4 nights a week. A lot of the games were on Saturdays, so I was playing junior hockey right into my late teens and college hockey. I had a scholarship into my early 20s. So I think sport really kept me out of some of the stuff that could have led to, say, I don't know, a strong addictions. I was never into drugs, so it could have led me down a path of say, street drugs and such. So I was lucky that I plugged into hockey, but that being said, um, I still suppressed. I mean, athletes tend to party a lot because, you play a game and you go for men. A lot of times it's, we go out and play sport and then we have a few beers and we talk and, a few beers can lead to more beers. So I think for me, I turned to alcohol and sort of binge drinking through a lot of my late teens and 20s. Um, and then into my 30s, I started to, and even in my 20s, I was always looking for, I think, someone to rescue me in terms of relationships. So I was always looking for my relationship with a woman was always about, a lot of them were long distance relationships because they were more fun and it'd be looked more exciting. So you'd see them on the weekend. So I think I fell into this pattern of an addiction of falling in love, and it wasn't like a sex addict; it was more of a love addict. So
Mm.
I loved the first 2 or 3 years. It was like the honeymoon stage, and then when it got to something more serious and a commitment, I had a really hard time with that. So for me, I think I used alcohol, and I started working um, as an entrepreneur in my late 20s, and I really pushed myself in that area as well. So I became a sort of super achiever and I bought a house and I bought a second property in it, but I was really working myself to the bone. I had no self-awareness around the stuff we're talking about, like taking vacations and balance. So I think I used work, alcohol, and these multiple sort of long distance relationships that didn't turn into anything more serious into my mid 30s. And that's when I started to go, okay, hold on. This is not sustainable. So I started to feel some of those physical manifestations come up, um, where I couldn't do this forever. Like I couldn't work myself to the bone. I couldn't party to the bone. And going around in these relationships wasn't a good, well, I wasn't a good person. Like that wasn't a nice
Right.
thing to do. Um, and not that I was a bad part of the relationships, but not wanting to commit, that's not a very good, person to be with. So
Right.
I started to do some real soul searching and realized that, hey, I need to learn why I'm like this. So why am I not committing? And why am I working too much? And why am I drinking too much? And that sort of led into all these different modalities that we talked about. So I came home from a trade show in my mid 30s and I felt just burnt out, like physically. And I Googled corporate wellness retreat and I ended up at Deepak Chopra Center in San Diego, California. And that sort of just, once you peel back a layer of consciousness, then I don't think there's any going back. Like
Mhm.
it's a harder path, but once you open the door to it, you
Yeah.
can't sort of go back into those old patterns. You start to realize that you have to start making some changes.
What was the biggest aha for you going to that retreat?
There was a ton of them, but I really, the first time they taught us how to meditate, I was instantly like, I was hooked. I was like, this is the most beautiful thing in the world. I went from a guy who was running around from hockey game to practice, and then in business from sales meeting to sales call, and then all of a sudden someone said, "Hey, you can stop and calm that sort of busyness and that mind chatter." It was like it was monumental in terms of me saying, "Wow, this feels really good," just to calm the body and calm the mind down. It was a pivotal moment, and ever since then, I've been meditating for 20 years now, and it's become a huge staple in my life, and it's probably the reason why I'm healthy at my age, considering
Yeah.
all the stuff that I did, in my
Yeah.
20s and 30s.
It's beautiful. Yeah. So now you're in a position of expanding your own awareness and building some serious tools that support you, but also support others on their journey of reclaiming back their power, their time, their energy, their health. So, what's next for you?
So I'm continuing. I run another business, and I really enjoy creating content. So that's what I'm doing right now. One of the lessons I'm learning right now, if you can detach from the outcome of what your work is. So that's been a big lesson for me the last few years, because I always sort of start working on something and I want to see, a really awesome result. And there's an old Vedic scripture and text. I think it's one of the oldest books in the world, called the Bhagavad Gita. I'm sure you've heard of it.
Mhm.
And one of the main lessons is detach from the outcome. I think there's a character in the book, Krishna, who's going to war, and he's really worried about how things are going to turn out. And the his mentor in the I think his name's Arjuna, and in the story tells him, you need to learn to detach from that outcome of what's going to happen. So for me, sometimes right now, I'm finding I'm really enjoying putting content out and detaching from what is going to happen next. I do work with a handful of clients privately. I'm finding I want to reach more people somehow, so I'm in the middle of trying to um, investigate or discover what that's going to look like, whether that's more group setting retreats or maybe an app. I'm not really sure right now, but I'm really enjoying creating content that I feel like wants to come out of me and into the
Mhm.
into the world. So I'm doing a lot of that on social media and just seeing what that sort of turns into and what the market is calling for.
Mhm.
Um, I'll continue to offer the private coaching. I do have an online course as well, and I think what I'm doing is learning that, again, that lesson, detaching from the work that I'm doing, of what it's gonna actually look like.
Yeah. And that's probably one of the hardest lessons of being human.
I think so.
That's
Yeah,
right.
and sometimes we have to, to have that awareness that it's come up again. Um, if
Yeah.
you can sort of stop it earlier in the stage, then eventually it starts to go away.
Yeah. Yeah. Takes practice because if anything, as human beings and the system that we live in, we are ingrained to always look at the outcome, always attach to it and always look at the outcome.
Yeah, there's a story I love to tell people. There's a guru that flies to California from India, and he's in front of 50,000 people in the stadium. And he says, "Do you want to know the five keywords to transform your life and find a lot of space and peace and freedom. And the stadium gets dead quiet. You could hear a needle drop. And he says these 5 words. He says, I don't need to know.
Mm.
So when we can apply that to our life, I mean, a lot of us have a huge problem with that place of uncertainty. But really, when you think about it, life is uncertain. There's no guarantees of we're even going to be alive tomorrow.
Yeah.
So if you can live from that place, I think that's a sweet spot to live in where you don't need to know the outcome of anything. So I get, whenever I do get triggered, I remind myself of that. I don't really need to know. I don't need to know.
Yeah. Yeah. At least not in that moment. For you
Yeah, exactly.
to come back to center and lean into that space of what are we really doing here, and not getting caught up in the anxiousness and the overthinking of the outcome.
Yeah, and again, like you said, it's a lifelong sort of human lesson, I think, and it doesn't happen overnight. But again, if you're creating some of these practices we talk about, help increase your level of self-awareness. So you know, I have a friend of mine who was he was a one of the first persons that studied with Maharishi, and when he brought transcendental meditation into North America from India, and he always tells a story. It's like when we really narrow our vision, um, that's when we sort of get stuck. But if we can expand our vision, so it's like,
Right.
for example, if you're walking down the street and you're focusing on a car that might hit you or something, or even a single tree, for example, whatever you're constantly thinking about, versus seeing the entire, you know, the sky and the sun and the trees and the cars, like we tend to really narrow our vision onto things that are a lot of cases uncertain, or maybe fears, or stories, whatever it may be. So I think one of the key takeaways from meditation, or that anything, any practice, doesn't have to be meditation, anything that allows you time to sit and just be with yourself, it creates that level of awareness where you're not narrowing down on a problem. You're more sort of looking at the entire
Mm-hmm.
universe,
Mm-hmm.
seeing as it is in your life, and not getting
Right.
stuck on those patterns.
Yeah. Definitely opens an opportunity for expansiveness.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's beautiful. Well, David, I think I could be talking to you for much longer about some of these experiences, and not only your own journey in what you've witnessed, but what you've witnessed for others, which I think we sometimes dismiss real easily because it doesn't happen to us. We often feel it doesn't warrant or it doesn't have the same weight of the lesson that's been learned. And I think perhaps the smartest people in the room learn from other people's experiences and apply their lessons to their own life rather than having to witness it for themselves. So I think that's what you're echoing of what I'm hearing, and I'm trusting that those who listen to this interview will garner from that as well. So thank you for taking the time for this conversation and sharing your experiences. So thank you so much, David.
No, thank you. It was a pleasure to sit with you today.
Thank you. I'm Naranjan, and you've been listening to Master of Your Crafts podcast. Please subscribe, rate, and review, and join me next week for another episode. Thank you for listening.